worse for the extremely unfortunate consumers. Happy to take questions.
Were you surprised by the outcome of this investigation and what you found out about Telstra?
We have been extremely surprised. We did hear of stories from, for example, financial counsellors, networks who were letting us know, but the extent of this behaviour, when you manipulate credit assessments, when you sell people things they just clearly don't need, as I say, multiple products, but also premium plans that everyone would understand these people don't need and also just could not afford.
Were there any other people involved or affected other than this 108 that your investigation focused on?
We're not sure how wide that goes, but we have got an undertaking from Telstra to search that out and remedy it. So Telstra have now agreed to waive the debts or refund the monies paid. I think it's fair to say with Telstra, on the one hand, they were way too slow to react to this. Actions they took early on were completely inadequate, but now having got the attention of their senior management and board, they have now put a very good remediation program in place.
Why did the investigation take so long? What were the key challenges?
There were many challenges with such an investigation. Dealing with 108 Indigenous consumers spread essentially right across Australia. We went to some of those communities. That takes time, lining these things up. You've got to take witness statements off people who often English isn't their first language, and often also people who are feeling great shame, yet you had to get them to sit down and give a statement, which was extremely difficult for them. So just the breadth of the inquiry, we're talking geographies in Western Australia, Northern Territory, South Australia, so this was very widespread.
Are you satisfied that Telstra is going to do the right thing from here on out?
We are now satisfied that Telstra will do the right thing. I think the fact that we have got agreement with Telstra to put to the court a penalty of $50 million. Now, it's completely up to the court what penalty they award based on the statement of agreed facts. But I think once you're talking penalties of that size, that just sends an immediate signal to senior management and boards that this is very serious behaviour. This is behaviour that should not be associated with their company or any Australian company.
Have there been any other similar telco penalties, or do you think this would be the first of its kind?
The highest penalty we've got for a telco is around $9 million, I think, against Apple for misleading behaviour in relation to their phones. We did have a $10 million penalty against Coles. We have previously had a $10 million penalty against Telstra and against Ford. The size of this penalty, I think, just indicates our concern when you've got consumers with such extreme vulnerability, behaviour that went on for 2.5 years, behaviour that should have been picked up and addressed. So this is extremely concerning behaviour.
Going back to these 108 individuals, you said that Telstra has allowed them to, given them their money back, essentially. Are there any other kind of remedies that these people will get, any way to make up for the shame and stress that they felt?
I think the compensation is going to simply be the waiving of debts and the refunding of money already paid. So they will be completely recompensed, and Telstra has an undertaking with us. They will look to make sure their systems are fixed up so that this doesn't happen again, and they'll also look to see if any other customers have been dealt with in this way. So look, we're comfortable with that response, but the message we want to send is this is simply dreadful behaviour that should not occur. It should not be associated with any company at all, much less one the size of Telstra.
Are you aware of any other investigations right now of similar bad behaviour?
We don't have any other investigations on foot of behaviour as bad as this. I'm pleased to say. But what we are concerned about is when companies put in place incentive systems where there's financial consequences for selling at certain levels, which is what was the case here. There were sales targets that had to be met. There were financial consequences if they weren't. And companies, when they put those systems in place, and these are systems devised by senior management, approved and understood by boards, when you put those systems in place, you've got to have checks to make sure that people much lower down in the organisation aren't doing things badly in your name. And Telstra did not have those systems here, as can be seen by the extremely concerning behaviour that was just not picked up by their systems.
What do you think other companies should try and do to protect Indigenous Australians?
I think firstly, other companies should not have incentives attached to the sales so that people have a financial incentive to take advantage of vulnerable consumers. They should make sure that does not happen. If they do want to go ahead with those schemes, they need rigorous audit checks. And let's keep in mind, that's not that hard, right? You only need to check a very low proportion and you'll quickly pick up if inappropriate things are happening. So this isn't a big expense. If you put in place systems like this, which can be prone to being taken advantage of, put the systems in place to make sure that this does not occur.
Was this just a small number of Telstra staff guilty of making these sales?
We've got evidence at 5 stores across Australia in some remote areas where you had particularly vulnerable consumers. So it is, in our view, a very high proportion of consumers who are extremely vulnerable. Yes, it's a small proportion of Telstra's overall consumer base, but in terms of consumers who are vulnerable, it is a significant number of consumers and so extremely concerning.
Settlement of 50 million, do you think that'll just be a formality through the courts and that'll be the number, or could it be a bit higher? I see contravening consumer laws 1.1 million per penalty, and if it's 108 customers, does that mean it could be 118 roughly million?
The penalty we've submitted to the court is one that Telstra and ourselves have jointly agreed to put before the court, but it's totally up to the court. The court has complete discretion as to what that penalty will be. They may decide it should be higher, they may decide it should be lower, or they may go with our 50 million. That's completely in their discretion. It is worth noting that this penalty is under the old penalty regime. The old penalty regime is $1.1 million per breach, and here we have a penalty of $50 million. The penalties now for behaviour that occurred post 2008, late 2018, is $10 million per breach, or 10% of turnover. So I think that, I'm very pleased with the sort of penalty we've put before the court, because you need these penalties. Only if you have these penalties do the senior management and boards understand that this is serious. If the penalty was a few million, how do you know it's serious? $50 million, it's serious. And with the new penalty regime under consumer law, I'm very hopeful we're going to have a lot more high penalties like this, so that corporate Australia understands they should not be breaching Australian consumer law, they should not be taking advantage of Australian consumers.
And have Telstra been pretty forthcoming with you over the course of the investigation since July last year?
Telstra were slow to act when they started to hear reports. So on the one hand, I think Telstra were too slow to act and their responses were inadequate. But since the investigation's been in full swing, since the board and senior executives have understood the nature of the behaviour, then their response has been very good. I've had calls from Andy Penn, I had a call from the chairman of Telstra expressing their extreme regret. And I've no doubt that's genuine. I think their regret at the moment is genuine, but they realise they're at fault for not having prevented this happening in the first place. And now it's their responsibility to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for coming in. Appreciate it. Good on you.